Hey everyone, ready to level up your mental game?
Always.
Today we're doing a deep dive into Marcus Aurelius and Meditations, specifically Book 6.
Oh, nice.
We're talking about building what he calls an inner citadel,
Yeah.
like some serious mental armor, using those classic Stoic principles. It's like building a mental fortress
Right.
and preparing it to withstand any kind of siege life throws your way.
I like that.
So no more just, hit in the beach to de-stress.
Well, I mean, vacations are still good.
Right, of course, of course.
But the Stoics are really saying, like, true peace that comes from within.
Okay, so we're trading beach retreats for like mental bunkers.
That's a good way to put it.
All right, I like the sound of that. So what exactly are we building with? What are the blueprints for this inner citadel?
Well, you can kind of think of it as like a fortress, and the bedrock is reason.
Okay.
And then you reinforce that foundation with virtue and self-control. And then, like, a really key element here is this idea of indifference to externals.
Okay, so indifference to externals. It sounds kind of detached, right? Like we shouldn't care about anything outside of ourselves.
Yeah, it can sound like that at first, but it's not really about like shutting out the world. It's more about recognizing what we can and can't control. Think of it like a solid fortress wall.
Okay,
It's being battered by wind and rain,
right.
but it remains strong because it's not placing value on those external forces. And Stoicism really emphasizes this. The Stoics would say external events, whether it's like wealth, health, even people's opinions, those things are all actually neutral in themselves. It's
Mhm.
our judgments about them that cause us to suffer or rejoice.
Okay, so it's not about ignoring reality, but more like we're choosing how we react to it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. I could see how that could be powerful. But doesn't that require like a ton of mental discipline to do that?
It does. It takes work.
Okay.
But that's where this whole building metaphor coming in. We're not just born with this inner citadel all ready to go. We got to construct it.
Yeah.
Brick by brick, and reason is our guide in that process.
So reason's the foundation. Okay. And we're strengthening it by practicing this indifference to externals. But what about those internal judgments?
Oh, yeah.
Those things that kind of pop into our heads out of nowhere, like, aren't those uncontrollable?
Well, that's a great question. Stoicism suggests that our judgments are actually within our control, like our opinions, our values, our principles. Marcus Aurelius really pushed us to constantly be examining these judgments, to make sure they're rooted in reason and virtue, not just coming from our emotions or, societal pressures.
So it's like taking a step back from those knee-jerk reactions. And often like having an internal judge and jury, evaluating our every thought.
I love that analogy.
Okay.
That inner courtroom, so to speak, is crucial for building your inner citadel. It's where reason presides, scrutinizing everything, making sure it aligns with our Stoic principles.
This is starting to make sense. But let's get practical. How do we actually live this out? Because it's one thing to, like, theorize about reason and virtue, but putting it into practice seems like a whole other challenge. Where do we even begin?
Well, Marcus Aurelius had some pretty insightful techniques. One that stands out is this emphasis on living in the present moment.
Okay.
And I know what you're thinking. Mindfulness, everyone's talking about that these days, right?
Right.
Well, for Stoics, it's not just about, like finding a moment of Zen or something. It's about being fully present in whatever you're doing,
Right.
not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. Marcus Aurelius even talks about focused action, mindful communication, even like intentional thinking.
Wow.
There's no room for mental laziness or like emotional roller coasters.
So we bring that same focus to our inner world as we would to, like, building a physical structure. Each thought, each action is another brick in the wall of our inner citadel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a constant process of construction. And, just like any building project, there will be times when we need to
Make adjustments.
yeah.
Like when the contractor messes up the plumbing and you have to reroute everything.
Ha ha. Well, maybe not exactly like that, but the principle is similar. Stoicism is about progress, not perfection. It's like this ongoing process of refining our reason, strengthening our virtue, even when we mess up.
Okay, so there's room for error. We don't have to, like, beat ourselves up if we have a less than stoic moment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Marcus Aurelius even acknowledged this. He said we might even stumble upon something better than virtue and reason, though he considered it unlikely. But the point is, we're constantly learning, adjusting our course. It's like a ship navigating towards its destination.
So we're all captains of our own mental ships, plotting a course through life's unpredictable waters. But what happens when we hit those inevitable storms? How does Stoicism help us in those moments when life throws a real hurricane our way?
That's a great question, and that's what we're going to dive into next time.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. We'll be right back after a quick break.
So we've been talking about building our inner citadel, this mental fortress of Stoic strength. But what about when the enemy at the gates is like other people? You know, the folks that just like really test our patience and push our buttons.
Yeah, it's unavoidable, right?
Yeah.
It's like no matter how strong our inner citadel is, we're always going to encounter people who challenge our peace of mind.
So how do we deal with that?
Well,
The key, as you might expect, lies in focusing on what we can control.
so we can't control other people's actions, but we can control our reactions.
Exact.
Okay, that makes sense in theory. But how do we actually apply that in real life? Like, let's say you're dealing with a coworker who's constantly taking credit for your ideas.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah. Or they're always interrupting you or just generally making your life miserable. How would you approach that from a Stoic perspective?
It's so easy to get caught up in the anger and frustration, but the Stoics would tell us to take a step back. Examine our judgments about the situation, like what's really fueling those negative emotions. Is it the coworker's behavior itself, or is it our interpretation of their actions?
So it's like recognizing that maybe that coworker is acting that way because of their own insecurities or their own internal struggles. That it's not necessarily a personal attack, even if it feels like one.
Precisely. Remember that fortress wall analogy?
Yeah,
We don't get upset at the wind and rain because we recognize those elements are just a part of nature.
right.
In the same way, we can try to see challenging behavior as a reflection of the other person's internal state, not a reflection of our worth.
Okay, I get that. But it's still tough to swallow sometimes, especially when someone's being like blatantly disrespectful. It's not about becoming a doormat though, right?
Definitely not. Stoicism isn't about passivity. It's about responding with wisdom and virtue, not reacting with anger or resentment.
So in that coworker example, like a Stoic response might involve calmly but firmly asserting your ownership of those ideas, or setting clear boundaries, or maybe even going to someone who can actually do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about taking action, but from a place of reason and clarity, not being driven by emotion.
That reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Book 6. Aurelius says, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." I love that.
So good.
It's just so powerful, like rising above the negativity and embodying those virtues that we value, even when someone's trying to provoke us.
Totally. That's like a perfect example of how Stoicism can be transformative. Instead of being pulled down to their level, we choose to embody a higher way of being.
So it's not just about defending ourselves. It's like we're setting an example, showing a different way to approach conflict.
Right. And who knows, maybe our actions will even influence them in a positive way. Though that's not the main goal.
Right. This kind of brings up another tricky aspect of dealing with difficult people. Forgiveness. Is that something that Stoicism encourages?
That's an interesting question. Stoicism doesn't explicitly advocate for forgiveness in the, like traditional sense, like condoning or excusing wrongdoing. But it does emphasize the importance of letting go of anger and resentment for our own sake.
So it's not about saying, oh, it's okay, you didn't mean to hurt me. It's more about releasing those negative emotions because they're only hurting us.
Exactly. There's that saying about holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah, that's a good one. But how do we actually let go? It's easier said than done,
Right.
especially when you've been really hurt or wronged.
Well, one technique the Stoics recommend is practicing a perspective taking, trying to understand the other person's motivations, their circumstances. Now, this doesn't mean excusing their behavior, but it can help us detach from that personal sting of the offense.
So it's like seeing the bigger picture, recognizing that everyone's operating from their own unique set of experiences and challenges.
Exactly. And by cultivating empathy and understanding, we can start to loosen the grip of anger and resentment.
This all goes back to that key Stoic principle, right? Focusing on what we can control. We can't control the actions of others, but we can control our interpretations, our judgments, and ultimately our responses.
Yeah, and that's where true freedom lies. That freedom from being ruled by our emotions, by the opinions of others, by the circumstances we find ourselves in.
It's like we're reclaiming our power. We're building that inner citadel, not just to protect ourselves from external forces, but also from that turmoil within.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial part of building our inner citadel, cultivating virtue.
Okay, let's talk about virtue. It's not just about being good in like a conventional sense, right? There's a deeper meaning here.
Absolutely. For the Stoics, virtue is about living in accordance with nature, and specifically with our rational nature. It's about embodying wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance in every aspect of our lives.
So it's like an inner compass, guiding us towards what is truly good and fulfilling.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting. The Stoics believed that virtue is sufficient for happiness.
Wait, so they're saying that if we're virtuous, we'll be happy no matter what's going on around us? Isn't that a little idealistic? How can we possibly be happy when we're faced with things like loss or hardship or injustice?
I know it can sound paradoxical, but the Stoics truly believed that true happiness, or what they called eudaimonia, is not dependent on external factors like wealth, health, or social status. It's an inner state of being, like a tranquility of mind that arises from living in accordance with reason and virtue.
So it's not about denying the reality of pain or suffering, but it's more about cultivating this inner strength that allows us to transcend those challenges.
Precisely. The Stoics weren't saying we should just passively accept everything or deny hardship. They knew that life is full of challenges, but they believed that we could face those challenges with courage, wisdom, and most importantly, with virtue.
This is a tough concept, but I can see how it could be incredibly empowering. If our happiness isn't dependent on external factors, then we really do have the power to create joy and fulfillment regardless of our circumstances.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of building our inner citadel. We're not just building walls to keep out the negativity. We're also creating a space within ourselves where we can cultivate virtue, practice wisdom, and find true contentment.
But let's be real for a second. Building this inner citadel sounds like a lifelong project. Where do we even start? What are some practical things we can do to actually put these ideas into practice?
Marcus Aurelius recommends this practice of constantly examining our judgments. He says we should ask ourselves, is this opinion I'm holding based on reason and virtue? Or is it being influenced by things like fear, anger, or desire?
So it's like a mental checklist, a way of filtering our thoughts and reactions through a Stoic lens.
Exactly. And like any skill, it takes practice. The more we do it, the better we become at identifying and challenging those judgments that aren't serving us.
Yeah, I can see how that would be helpful in those everyday situations that can so easily throw us off balance, like getting stuck in traffic or dealing with a rude cashier, or even just feeling overwhelmed by your to-do list.
Absolutely. Instead of letting those external events dictate our emotional state, we can use our reason to choose a more constructive response.
So it's about taking back control of our inner world, regardless of what's happening around us.
Precisely. And that's a powerful form of empowerment. It lets us navigate all those ups and downs of life with more grace, resilience, and peace of mind.
But what about those really big challenges, the ones that truly test our resilience, like a loss of a loved one or a serious illness or a major setback in your career? How does Stoicism help us deal with those really difficult times?
That's where the inner citadel becomes even more important. It's not that it's going to protect you from pain or grief, but it can provide that foundation of strength and perspective to help us weather those storms.
So it's not about denying the pain, but finding a way to process it without being totally overwhelmed by it.
Exactly. The Stoics knew that even in the face of those really tough losses or hardships, we still have the power to choose our response. We can choose to give in to despair. Or we can draw on our inner strength, our reason, and our virtue to find a path forward.
This sounds like a very different approach to grief and loss than what we're used to in our culture. Like instead of encouraging us to avoid or suppress those painful emotions, Stoicism seems to be saying that we can actually find a way to experience them without being consumed by them.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Stoicism doesn't offer easy answers. It acknowledges that pain is real, but it also emphasizes our capacity for resilience, our ability to find meaning and purpose even in those rough times.
So it's about finding that balance between acknowledging the pain and remembering our own inner strength.
Right. And it takes practice, especially when you're in those moments of intense emotion. But the Stoics believed that by working on our reason and virtue, we build this reservoir of inner strength that can help us navigate even the most challenging things that life throws our way.
This is so insightful. It's like we're not just passively accepting whatever happens, we're actively engaging with it, using our reason to try and make sense of it all and make choices that are in line with our values.
Yeah, and that's a key takeaway from Book 6. Building the inner citadel isn't about becoming some emotionless robot. It's about developing this resilient core that lets us experience life fully, with all the ups and downs, but still maintaining that sense of inner peace and clarity.
I love that idea of the inner citadel as a source of both strength and peace. Like we're building this internal sanctuary where we can find refuge and clarity, no matter what chaos is happening out in the world.
And the cool thing is it's like a portable sanctuary. We carry it with us wherever we go.
So no matter what's going on around us, we always have that inner strength to tap into.
Exactly.
That's a really empowering thought. This has been such a fascinating discussion. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of all the wisdom in Book 6 of Meditations.
It really is a treasure trove of insights, and the more you explore it, the more you find all these practical tools and perspectives that can help you deal with life's complexities with more clarity, resilience, and purpose.
Speaking of practical tools, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the specific techniques that Marcus Aurelius recommends for building our inner citadel. He mentions several practices that can help us strengthen our reason, cultivate virtue, and develop a greater sense of inner peace.
One technique he really emphasizes is the practice of negative visualization.
Negative visualization. That sounds kind of counterintuitive. Isn't Stoicism all about focusing on the positive?
It might seem that way at first, but negative visualization is actually really powerful for cultivating gratitude and appreciation for what we already have.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does this work? Like, am I just supposed to sit around and imagine all the terrible things that could happen?
No, no, no. It's not about dwelling on worst-case scenarios or getting lost in negativity. It's more about taking a few moments each day to reflect on the things you value, and then just imagine what life would be like without them.
So, like, imagine what it would be like to lose my health, or my job, or my loved ones.
Exactly. And by doing that, you start to gain this deeper appreciation for how precious those things are, and you feel a renewed commitment to cherishing them while you have them.
That's fascinating. It's like we're using our imagination to create contrast, to remind us of what we have to be grateful for.
Right. And it can be surprisingly effective at shifting your focus from what you lack to what you have, from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
So it's like training our minds to see the good even when things are tough.
Exactly. And that can have a huge impact on your overall well-being and contentment.
This makes me think of another technique he talks about, viewing obstacles as opportunities for growth.
Oh, yeah, that's a core principle of Stoicism. Instead of seeing challenges as setbacks or like a reason to despair, we can choose to see them as chances to learn and grow and develop our character.
So it's all about reframing our perspective, seeing the potential for growth even when things are hard.
Precisely. It's a really powerful shift in mindset. Instead of being defeated by those obstacles, we can actually use them as fuel for our growth, as stepping stones on our path to becoming the best versions of ourselves.
It's like that Nietzsche quote, that which does not kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah, there's a definite parallel there. And the Stoics believe that this process of growth through adversity is essential for developing virtue and resilience.
So it's not about like seeking out hardship or anything, but recognizing the potential for growth and the challenges that are going to come up no matter what.
Exactly. We can choose to be victims of circumstance, or we can choose to see those challenges as opportunities to learn, adapt, and become more resilient.
It's like that other quote from Book 6, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way.
Love that one. It's such a good reminder that even the toughest obstacles can become opportunities for growth and transformation if we have the right mindset.
So it's not about pretending everything is easy. It's about recognizing that there's potential for learning and growth in every situation, even the hard ones.
Yes. And that can be so empowering. It gives you that sense of agency and control, knowing you have the power to choose your response, to find meaning and purpose, even in the face of adversity.
This has been so inspiring and thought-provoking. We've covered so much, but I feel like there's still so much more to uncover in Book 6 of Meditations.
Oh, yeah. It's a truly inexhaustible source of wisdom. The more you delve into it, the more you discover all these practical tools and perspectives that can help us navigate life with more clarity, resilience, and purpose.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, empowering our listeners with the knowledge and insights they need to live their best lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And what better source of wisdom than Stoicism, a philosophy that has stood the test of time and continues to offer guidance for living a good and fulfilling life no matter what.
And on that note, we'll wrap up Part 2 of our deep dive into Book 6 of Meditations. Join us next time as we continue our exploration and uncover even more practical techniques for building our inner citadels. All right, welcome back. We've been on this journey exploring how to build our inner citadel. We've talked about reason and virtue, and cultivating a healthy dose of indifference to all those things we can't control. But what about the end goal? Like, what does it actually look like to live in this super fortified mental space? So in this final part of our deep dive into Book 6 of Meditations, let's talk about happiness, Stoic style.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something that I think gets misunderstood a lot. People hear Stoic and they picture like, somebody who's emotionally repressed, just detached from the world.
Yeah.
But the Stoic idea of happiness, what they call eudaimonia, it's actually a lot deeper than that.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions or becoming some kind of unfeeling robot. What's the Stoic recipe for, like, a good life?
It all comes down to recognizing that true happiness doesn't come from chasing those external things, the pleasures or the achievements.
Mm.
It's not about how much money you have or how many followers you have on social media. It's not even really about your physical health. The Stoics believed that true happiness comes from aligning yourself with nature, and specifically with our rational nature.
Okay, so living in accordance with reason, making wise choices, not letting our emotions just run wild. But doesn't that sound a bit like restrictive?
It's not really about restricting yourself. It's more about directing your energy towards what truly matters. The Stoics believed that by working on those virtues, like wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, we create this foundation for genuine happiness that can't be messed with by external stuff.
So it's not about denying the reality of, like, difficult emotions. It's more about building that inner strength so we can experience those emotions without being completely controlled by them.
Exactly. Remember, we've been talking about building this inner citadel, this mental fortress of strength and resilience.
Mm.
And one of the main benefits of this is that it helps you weather those inevitable storms of life.
This makes me think of that quote. There's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. So it's about recognizing what we can and can't control, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a key to understanding Stoic happiness. It's not about being passive or just accepting whatever fate throws at you. It's about focusing your energy on what you can actually influence, your thoughts, your actions, your judgments, and letting go of everything else.
Okay, so accepting reality as it is without resisting it. But how does that lead to happiness? Wouldn't that just make us apathetic or indifferent to everything?
No, not at all. It's realizing that your energy is best spent on what you can change, and that includes your own attitudes and perspectives. By choosing to focus on what's in your control, you free yourself from all that anxiety and frustration that comes with trying to force things to be different than they are.
That makes sense. It's like we're choosing to be constructive instead of wasting energy on stuff we can't do anything about. But I imagine that takes quite a bit of mental discipline.
It does, yeah. Building your inner citadel is not a passive thing. It takes effort and practice. And you have to be willing to challenge those ingrained habits you have of thinking and reacting in certain ways.
Hmm.
But the rewards are worth it.
So what are some of those rewards? What does it actually feel like to be experiencing this stoic happiness?
Well, it's this sense of inner peace and tranquility that isn't dependent on what's happening externally. You're free from being constantly tossed around by the waves of fortune. You can face challenges with courage, knowing that you have the inner resources to handle whatever comes your way.
That sounds pretty amazing, but I gotta be honest, it's a little hard to grasp. It's so different from how we're usually taught to think about happiness.
Right.
Like, we're told it's about getting stuff, achieving goals, experiencing pleasure.
Yeah, and those things definitely have their place, but the Stoics would say, don't build your happiness on that shaky ground. What happens when you lose those things, or you don't reach those goals, or the pleasure fades away?
Yeah, good point. It's like building a house on sand.
Exactly.
It might look good for a little while, but it's not going to last.
Stoicism is about building your happiness on more solid ground, on reason, on virtue, on a deep understanding of what it actually means to live a good life.
That reminds me of another quote from Book 6. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. So it's not just about our actions, but also about, like, tending to our inner world.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and it brings us to the importance of mindfulness. The Stoics weren't just philosophers, they were also really good at observing the human mind. And they understood that our thoughts have this huge impact on our emotions and how we experience the world.
So practicing mindfulness, paying attention to our thoughts and emotions without judgment. That's another key to building this inner citadel of happiness.
Absolutely. By being more aware of your thought patterns, you can start to challenge those negative or unhelpful thoughts and replace them with something better.
It's like we're cleaning up the mental clutter to make room for those more positive and empowering ways of thinking.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. Just like you have to maintain a physical building to keep it strong, you have to take care of your inner world to maintain that sense of stoic happiness.
So building this inner citadel isn't like a one and done kind of thing. It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery and growth.
Yes, exactly. It is a journey worth taking. The rewards are huge. A life of peace, clarity, purpose, and yeah, even joy.
This has been such an awesome deep dive into Stoicism. And this whole idea of building our inner citadel, I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired and empowered to start building their own.
I hope so.
It's been a pleasure talking about all this with you.
Likewise.
And remember, everyone, this journey of self-discovery and growth is always ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to explore,
That's the beauty of it.
and more ways to strengthen our inner worlds. So on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and those timeless Stoic principles. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep building your inner citadel, and keep diving deep.